I'm Pablo Martell, and this is Roads and Riches. Episode 4 of Roads and Riches. I am so excited about today's episode. I had an opportunity to sit down with Manny Perez de la Mesa, a tenured public company CEO that has had just an incredible career and a tremendous amount of success. And we get to unpack a lot of that today. Manny is an absolute wealth of knowledge, somebody that I feel so fortunate to really know on a bit of a personal level, and have an opportunity to really pick his brain in different times about different things. So really hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Again, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and let us know how we're doing. Really hope you're enjoying the pod. So without further ado, here's the show. All right, Manny, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your time with us. I feel incredibly fortunate to really kind of know you a bit on a personal level, and obviously I think you've been a sounding board and somewhat of a mentor to me, and throughout my early career, and I'm sure you probably will continue to be as long as you'll listen. So definitely got a lot I want to cover today, but I want to set the stage real quick. And so, correct me here on anything that I miss. So on really who Manny is in the business world, we'll say, because I think there's a lot of dynamics and nuances to who Manny is. But so for the better part of your career, about 20 years, you spent with Pool Corp. You were the CEO of Pool Corp, which is the largest and leader in a niche business. Pool is the largest distributor of pool products, I believe, in the world. And when you came into the company, which I believe it was around 99, Pool Corp traded at a market cap of roughly 175 million, I believe. And, over 20 years later, trades at between 15.5 billion to, I think north of 16 billion, now. So had you been invested through that time period, you would have enjoyed a 9,000% increase, or a 19.5% compounded annual growth rate, which is not terrible. And I believe is and has been probably, I think, jumps in and out, year over year, is, in the top 1,000 really most valuable companies in the world. So I think a lot to unpack there. And I think for, even some more context, just in a leadership role, when you came into the organization, I believe Pool employed roughly 1,000 people. And today Pool employs, I think, north of around 6,000 people today. So tremendous amount of growth over your tenure and over that time period. And so before we kind of unpack that and dive into that, want to get into a little bit about your background, kind of where you started and how you came up in your career.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. And by the way, I normally try to be modest, but since you referenced a few points there from a Pool Corp standpoint, the reference that you made to 19% plus total shareholder return CAGR, that does not include dividends. If you roll in dividends, and they do this every year, they update it. But in the past 30 years, in terms of total shareholder return, we have been consistently in the top 10, not top 10%, but top 10 companies, publicly traded companies in the United States. So we've, very fortunate, have a great team and good space, and have, we're able to continue to do a number of very good things. So circling back, and by the way, we were as high as number 3 at one point, but we slipped to number 8 last year
in total return, or most valuable.
Total shareholder return CAGR. Yep. Over a 30-year period, although we're not quite 30 years old yet, so that's a concession we make. But it's been very fortunate. And we are in the S&P 500. So So just circling back, you asked the question about what got me to Pool Corp. If that's fair.
I would say let's go back even to your early career, like what you did, where you decided to make that decision to study what you studied. Because as far as I know you. I think
Right.
you're a CMA, and so you have,
Yes.
I believe, you kind of had a foundation in accounting, right?
Yes. Yes. So it's interesting. Cuban immigrant, came when I was 4. Uh, like the great majority of Cuban immigrants, came with nothing, or my parents came with nothing. I was only 4, so I didn't count. Um, and therefore, while we progressed over time and everything else economically as a family, I started working full time right out of high school. So, and I did all my undergraduate and graduate school at night. So, and by the way, I was able to do that in 3 years, but that's a different story. Yeah, I didn't find it very difficult to take 15 credits a
Yeah.
term and,
Yep.
go to school from 6 to 10 or whatever it is.
And
So,
what were some of those early jobs that you had? Like what kind of things were you
well,
doing then?
I was fortunate, very fortunate to right out of high school, I joined a small company. And the principal owner of that company was one of the 2 founders of Burger King.
Oh wow.
And it was a restaurant themed company. He had just history, and I'm going to digress a little bit. I'll try to keep it short. But in '69, Burger King was purchased by Pillsbury. He stayed on a couple of years, and then after that, he started getting into various ventures, and he opened a higher end restaurant that was ultimately then sold to Chart House. So do you remember Chart House
Yes.
restaurants?
Yep.
And the restaurants were not nautical themed; they're more steak and wine and things of that nature. But basically, it was a restaurant chain. They had just opened up their 4th restaurant, and I was brought in as a temp to do bank reconciliations, catch up on their bank reconciliations. And after a couple of months and substituting in accounts payable and did a couple of payrolls while the other person was on vacation, they asked me to stay in permanently, and then I got progressively more responsibilities. But I was there for all of my undergrad period, a little bit over 3 years.
Okay.
Started in May and left in August 3 years later. And was able to grow and see a lot. And one of the things that helped me significantly was I was learning the theory in school and seeing the practice there.
Right.
In terms of majors, initially math came easy to me, so I was initially like a math major.
Mhm.
And then I figured out, well, what can I do with math other than being a professor? That wasn't particularly interesting long term, or an actuary. That was the other thing. I would be in a corner developing formulas and stuff. Moved over to computer science, but I also found that pretty rote. And I was doing accounting. I worked in their accounting department. In fact, was responsible for the accounting department in my tenure there in a small company. And basically said, well, I'll just default to finance. But I took all my electives in accounting because as I was studying finance, which I really liked, the numbers came from from the accounting side of the team. So I figured I'd take all my electives in accounting. So long story short, graduated undergrad finance, and I was 1 class short of having a double major.
Okay.
So graduated, started working with a subsidiary of RJ Reynolds Industries, which became RJ Nabisco. At the time, a large, top 20 company in terms of size, and started working as a financial analyst in their Americas division. So going back, I did that. My father suggested, hey, you know what? You should take that class in accounting. I have a few friends that are CPAs. That may be something you want to do. So I took that class in accounting, and then sat for the CPA exam, passed that, and then I had 2 paths at the time. One was to get a master's in accounting or a year of experience working for a public accounting firm. Didn't want to do that because I had interfaced enough with them, and I frankly would be going backwards in my career at the time if I had started at the very beginning. So the bottom line is, I did that. I got my MBA with enough classes in accounting to get the equivalent of a master's in accounting as well. And that's how I became a CPA. And then just for kicks, I said, well, there's a CMA thing. I thought it was interesting. I thought I would learn more.
Mm-hmm.
I was always interested. I'm still always interested in learning. And I did the CMA as well. So that was that educational part, and that got me in a finance role. Was able to progress into various finance roles over time, and then had a pivot 5 years into it after I had been in 3 different roles, including what is equivalent to a divisional controller role for the one of the divisions. And I figured I wanted to go into general management, and the only way to do that was to make a pivot earlier in the career than later. It's easier. So I moved to IBM, and where my deal there was I didn't want to do anything with accounting or finance, at least in my first 2 roles. And they were very good about that and giving me a lot of experiences in different areas that enabled me to learn about a manufacturing business and learn about business processes and learn about planning and things of that nature. So it was a great learning experience.
So let me stop you there. So,
Sure.
you know, in I think my career growing up, and I think others probably see this too. You know, you go through your career, and early on, you're trying to, one, learn as much as you can, but 2, also really try to figure out, what's my path, what's my next step, what's my next growth step. For anybody that is really thinking, that is really forward thinking, where am I going to get? What are my goals 3, 4, 5 years from now? And one thing that I think is true is that you certainly need to be proactive, and you need to be vocal, and you need to make sure that you make it known that this here is not where I want to, let's say, be for X period of time. I want to know what it takes to go here. Is there an opportunity here? So in your transition over to IBM, maybe what was that like? How did you have how do you have those conversations when you're talking with them and knowing, hey, this is really what I want. Is there a role for me here? How do I get to this position, X years from now? What's the path for that?
Right. And 2 parts here. I can tell you what I was thinking at the time, and I can tell you what I know now. And there are some nuances. What I was trying to do then, right? I enjoy learning. I enjoy the experiences. Still enjoy both of those: the experiences of people and seeing different situations and encountering that, and being part of a team, and the challenges that come with getting to success. But I was, in my 20s, was heavily weighted on how much can I learn, trying to learn as much as possible. I mean, going to school at night, undergrad and graduate school, doing the CMA on a lark, doing the CPA almost on a lark, all these type things was just all a thirst for learning, right? And generally speaking, in a company, there are opportunities that surface, and once you say yes a couple of times, then when another situation happens, you're going to be one of the first calls, especially if you've had success. Right. So that was, I'll call it, in my first 5 years at RJ Reynolds Industries. Within IBM, as that process developed, because they had offered me a previous job, but that was a finance role, and I said, I really want to grow, and I think I've got this from the technical standpoint pretty well wired. but I want to understand the business better. I want to be in a situation or a position where I can learn more about the business. And obviously I'm contributing and producing as I'm learning, right? And they were, again, very gracious to offer me that opportunity. And then again, it just, you perform, and they know you are interested in continuing to learn and grow and are willing to relocate. That was a big dynamic there, and that opened that door, and that's really the pattern of my career. I would say for the first roughly 14 years of my career, after my undergrad, was different opportunities, in most cases involving some sort of relocation, but opening another lever, giving me another set of experiences that complemented what I had built on before, right? And it was, it was great. And I had one of the other elements there from a personal growth standpoint. I also wanted to experience living in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. Didn't get to do all of those that I wished I could have done at the time, because there's only so much time. But that was the gist of that.
So at IBM, having these different experiences, getting exposure to these things, you then, I know, were with Del Monte for a little bit, and then obviously at Pool Corp. So I guess, real quick, maybe take us to what ultimately landed you at Pool, and what got you to, let's say, that next, I would say, step or really high leadership position at that point in your career.
Right. So yeah, Del Monte was part of RJ Reynolds Industries, became RJR Nabisco when they did the transaction with acquiring Nabisco, and Del Monte was one of the subsidiaries. Another one of the subsidiaries. I had worked with another one, but that gave me my first general management role, fortunately, in Costa Rica. And there, if you read a book, Barbarians at the Gate, there was also a movie on it, obviously both exaggerations. But the point here is RJR went through a transaction, a leverage buyout of significant notoriety that closed in February of '89. And $29 billion, the largest transaction I think it was the largest transaction for like the next 15 years. But the bottom line, or 20 years, the bottom line is, after that transaction, Del Monte was sold, and then the buyer of Del Monte ended up selling it again 3 years later. In those transactions, that caused me to kind of step back and figure out different priorities. And frankly, in '91, I decided I'm going to park, well, in '93, I decided I'm going to park my career and shift over the emphasis on family, because we had moved around a lot. At a certain point, there's the importance of stability and everything else for the kids and all that good stuff. So that '93, I made a decision as I was exiting Del Monte. I wanted to focus and stay in South Florida for purposes of the family, and didn't look outside of South Florida. And in that vein, I was encouraged by the former CEO of RJR Nabisco and the former CEO of Del Monte. Why don't you look for a business to buy and we'll sponsor you? So in that process, was looking at different businesses, and there was a business that was in air conditioning distribution that was owned by two holders. I ended up being hired by them with an equity piece. Didn't buy it, I was just hired to run it. And then less than 2 years later, one of the two owners of it asked me if that could be replicated in other markets, or the success we were having in Florida. And I said yes, and that led to that business buying out the other partner, doing a secondary offering. They were small public company at the time, and then we did a number of acquisitions to expand the network, and that raised my profile in the investment community because I was in many respects, the face of that business, and that led to my recruiter seeking me out for Pool, where the CEO was retiring at the end of '98.
Okay, so that's all. I think I want to kind of dig into that a little bit. So
Sure.
let's talk first, I guess, a little bit about your roles at Del Monte. Then, right? This is management roles. I know you were in South America at the time. Um,
Right.
what role were you in there? And maybe what were some of the things you were focused on, and kind of maybe what the a day to day looked like in that kind of role that you were in there.
Okay. So when I came to Del Monte, there was a change in leadership. So the previous CEO of Nabisco became the CEO of RJR Nabisco, and in that process, there was a bit of a reorganization, and there was the individual that was put in charge of Del Monte had the charge of doing a strategic assessment of that business and seeing how it can improve its competitive position and everything else. And these things happen in casual lunch conversations. Somebody that I had worked with before in another part of RGR that I had stayed in contact with, when they were talking, I'm looking for somebody that has these specs, right? If you know anybody, let me know. And he said, well, I just had lunch with Manny a couple of weeks ago. He was in South Florida for the christening of his son. So, and he says, well, what's he be? I remember Manny. I know Manny, right? What went from previously? And so we went to work at IBM, and he's done this. He says, oh, can you reach out to him? I want to catch up with him. And that led to my coming on. And basically, I was in a strategic planning role. When I came on board, it was basically an assessment of the business and trying to figure out where the business should invest and what needed to happen to better position the business and for growth and increased valuation. After that exercise process was over and that plan was approved, that led to a number of things that happened. But one of the things that happened was some changes in management. And that led to my being offered the position to go down to Costa Rica and be in charge of finance and operations there. And then ultimately, a few years later, down to Chile to be in charge of South America as well. So and then from there, coming back to Coral Gables to be responsible for operations, planning, and development. So reporting to the CEO. So those were the roles that I had at Del Monte. And basically general management. Mm-hmm. Then later on, more functional, in charge of operations for all the divisions, and planning and development.
So, leaving that role, you said you put things on pause, focusing on family for a bit, and at some point, you're trying to figure out, what's next, right? I imagine at some point, right? Like, what am I going to do next? What am I going to focus on next? Energy, efforts, all that, I think, even outside family, right? And one of the things that I think is, at least that I see right now, just in kind of some of the communities that I am in socially, and
right.
And a lot of too what is on social media right now, just kind of in the overall business space that's become very popular, is this idea of the silver tsunami, baby boomer generation retiring. There's a lot of really good, healthy businesses out there, and something that seems to be a pretty big trend is you'll get a lot of the very sharp Ivy League type quality students that they're electing maybe not to go to McKinsey or Goldman or Wall Street, and they're maybe starting a search fund and going to look for maybe some of these small businesses where you have somebody that's retiring. It's a bit antiquated, but it's a healthy business, and they see the opportunities to maybe bring some, new digital appetite to it, and maybe some social media, that kind of thing, where they see growth opportunities, and some of them even electing to roll some of these industries up. Super, I think. Big trend, we'll call it right now, at least that I'm seeing, and that is often talked about right now in some of the circles and communities that I'm in. And so it's interesting because it sounds like when you came out of your role at Del Monte, you then really started at one point searching. Said, all right, I'm going to go identify a great opportunity. And obviously you had some partners, you had folks that put a lot of trust in you, and they knew what your capabilities were. How did you go about that? What were you looking for specifically, and maybe by way of criteria? And I guess, what was that process like?
Sure. So yes, that is by the way, very good question point. Um, Philosophically, right? There are areas that are perceived to be attractive or hot, and a lot of talent migrates to those areas. And I thought, you know what, I can compete in that landscape, but there's also these areas that are below the radar, that don't have the same level of organizational talent, disciplines, things of that nature, where somebody like me could distinguish themselves more so than in the former, right? So I had identified distribution in '93 as an area that was largely underinvested in. Just for context, distribution, um, in prior to, call it, the '70s and '80s, it was typically self-contained within a manufacturing business or self-contained within a retail business. If you look at Walmart, Walmart is a retailer, but they're also a distributor. The lion's share of the merchandise that Walmart sells, whether it's on their stores or .com, comes, it's supported by their own self-contained distribution business. If you look at a number of manufacturers, they have, depending on the commercial policies, some level of distribution function within the business. And in fact, I saw that within IBM. One of my areas that I explored at one time was the distribution area of some of the plants and how they handle distribution. And that, again, some of it goes back to the commercial policies of the business, and then going back to seeing how those commercial policies were developed, right, and the trade-offs that were made. But distribution of itself was largely relegated. The talent did not migrate there. If you were an IBM, for example, you did not want to manage the distribution center. You wanted to go up the sales chain or the product development chain or the manufacturing chain, right? Those were the chains of progression to upper management. Typically, the guys that managed the DCs were not the best and brightest, with all due respect, right? And that was the same same way in other businesses as well. And I thought, God, there's an opening here. Part one. Part two, in certain sectors of the economy where distribution did exist, these were largely family-owned businesses, where by virtue of call it common sense and a good work ethic, people were able to make a living, to your point, right? Mm-hmm. And not especially sexy businesses, right? Not a major attractor of talent, but and by the way, no management development programs, no development in any respect. So I saw that as an opportunity, and that led to, I thought, I can take what I've learned in the first, call it, for almost 20 years of my career at the time, and apply some of those principles there to look at, developing a go-to-market uh, 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 strategy, developing a process for inventory management and replenishment and control, um, looking at how you can work with customers to help them grow their business, how you can partner with certain suppliers to help them grow their business, and you can create a genuine win-win. I mean, so as you start doing some of those things and you see, hey, this works, this actually works, right? It's not just and in this space, right? Given the competitive landscape, given talent and the people, the backgrounds, we can make a mark. We can be different, right? That was the key, and that opportunity is ripe. It always impresses me how many untold millions of businesses there are.
Yep.
And how they survive. Now, you always read about 80-90% of the businesses fail, and that's true. There's a high churn factor, but there are a number of long-standing businesses that I can't say they're undermanaged because they provide a lifestyle for the principals, the owners. But really, they are undermanaged in terms of really understanding the market, understanding what they could do for their customers, understanding how they could work with their suppliers, understanding how they can address complementary areas, whether it be product categories or customers, and really then the strategy is I'll call it relatively speaking, the easy part. The hard part is having the discipline every day to pursue, very methodical, pursue that and address everything. And obviously you got to do it in scale with people, and that becomes management. And the whole crux of it is just doing that and replicating and expanding and boom, boom, boom. And all of a sudden that undermanaged lifestyle business that was doing 10 million in sales and making $500,000, you fast forward and now, 5 years later is doing 100 million in sales and 10 million in profit.
Right.
And that's transformational,
Right.
And doing that is special because it creates a special feeling within the team of success. Right. It's kind of like, since you played sports, it's kind of like there's nothing like being on a team and winning.
Yeah.
A team. There's something to be said about winning individually in certain sports, but winning as a team, there's a certain chemistry, a certain situation that's for my mind, it's great.
It's special. It is
special.
Yeah. And so I think some of the things that you described too, and this is something that I think kind of intrigues me. Also, I mean, I love looking at these things. I love looking on Biz Buy Sell and where, there's companies for sale, what's going on out there, what hasn't sold for a while. And, I'll kind of dig into these, just for fun sometimes. And but for you specifically, right, you see the opportunity. Did you ever have like that moment of like, well, this looks so obvious to me. What am I missing? Why hasn't somebody else figured this out? Like, and what gives you right? And then gives you that confidence to say, right, I can execute and I can go do this. Like, there's some things out there that, even sometimes that I'll look at and be like, what am I missing here? Like, there seems to be such an incredible opportunity for the right person or maybe the right background for somebody to execute on something here. What am I missing?
Right. By the way, whether it be ignorance or arrogance, sometimes that question, which is a great question, isn't asked, and it should be asked. I will tell you that one of the things that did happen here, one of my reservations, I'm going back to 93, in my thought process and what I'm looking at, I had worked at two, IBM was like the 5th or 6th largest company in the world at the time, and RJR was like 12th or 14th. Multi-billion-dollar businesses, right? And I understood that there were significant resources. If I had an issue, I had a person in legal. If I had an issue in another type of situation, I could reach out to somebody in HR, and these people that were experienced and could provide me context to help me make a better decision or address a situation in a more effective way. So there was ample resources out there that over the course of my career I reached out to as I needed to, right? And I knew full well that in a smaller business, those resources did not exist, right? In anywhere near form and fashion, right? So one of my reservations was I come to a business and their business was doing like just over 60 million in sales with 3 million EBITDA. So I looked at business and I said, "There's nobody here, right? I mean, there's people there that they're doing the work, right? I mean, there's a controller, there's a person in charge of ops, and there's all this type of stuff, right? But there isn't the depth and breadth of talent that I could reach out to. Right. So it gave me pause. Now, the other dynamic, and this is maybe a bit on the arrogant side, is I always looked at it as, okay, if I fail, right, then I could always go back to where I was. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on one's perspective, I always lived below my means. Mm-hmm. So if I had to go back a step, that was perfectly okay with me, mm-hmm. right? So therefore it was, and again, my thrust, I never thought of becoming a CEO. That was never my aspiration, frankly, right? My aspiration was to continue to learn and grow.
Right. So
I could add more value to my employer and win with a team, right? It was like, imagine that you're coaching Little League, mm-hmm. right? And you enjoy coaching Little League, right? And you enjoy the kids and everything else, and you may grow with your kids, right? Over time, right? Whether baseball or softball, right? Whether it's baseball or soccer, right? Yep. But the point is, you grow with it. It's not because you aspire to be a major league manager, right? Right? It's because you enjoy it, right? And you're just simply looking to enjoy it and learn and grow, right? And that's one of the other nuances. At some point in there, my pivot was no longer career aspirations. Mm-hmm. It was more ongoing learning and growth, and that coincided with the family side and saying, you know what, right? I'm fine. I'm comfortable. That's done, right? I can financially be at this level indefinitely. Right. And then the focus was just enjoy. And I've been extremely fortunate to have had the opportunities that I've had, and also to enjoy them as much as I have.
Right. So I guess real quick, actually, before we get into some more of Pool Corp. So one of the things that you touched on, and as I know you too, is you enjoy sports. You are, I think, have that competitive nature in you, which I presume, and obviously I think, comes along with, having a tremendous amount of success. I think you have to have some bit of a competitive edge. But something that you just referenced there is, that feeling that you get, you're that rush that you get when you have that sense of accomplishment and you have that success in that team environment. And I think that plays a lot into it. Do you have any points in time that you recall where you felt that, or maybe even felt it for the first time? And these were, some times that, maybe even you look back on and you go, what a rush, or how exciting. And these were points in time that, they're memorable for you. They're, influential.
Fortunately, I'm very fortunate to have had that many, many times. Mm-hmm. And it's really neat. That's not a popular term necessarily, but neat is, I think, explains it. The best part there is when people after the fact tell you, Manny, I never, this is such a great experience. I never knew work could be this much fun.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I'm going to jump to Pool Corp since that's your next topic.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most gratifying things to me at Pool was the building of a culture. And there's a number of things that we did to reinforce, to build that and then reinforce it. But every year I would review with the board, approximately the top 100, 110 positions and the individuals in those positions. And it still applies today. But if you look at one of the metrics that I looked at was tenure in the company. And of those top 100, 110 positions, the average and median, because I checked both, was typically between 18 and 19 years.
Wow.
Right? So these are individuals that came into the company, whether they were in their 20s or their 30s, in most cases 20s or 30s, right? Came into the company. They found a home, right? Where they were able to enjoy themselves and have a genuine sentiment that they were contributing as part of something else. Yeah. Right? And they wanted to stay in the team.
Yeah. Be part of something bigger than you.
Yeah. And they continued to grow, in most cases to be in that level. They didn't start there. They grew within the company. Right. And there's another thing, and there's little things, but like, for example, the Department of Transportation does an audit of large businesses that they kind of have on a schedule where they audit businesses that have their own trucking, right? So a Pool does a lot of, a little bit more than half the revenues are delivered to the customer, whether it's a home site or retail store or whatever. And, north of 1,000 vehicles. So, they came through and they did their audit, and the guy at the end wanted to meet me, and I said, okay, I was in town, so we met, and he says, this is remarkable. One of the things that prompted their audit was they look at the number of drivers and things of that nature, and they look at turnover, and they said, I've been doing this like 30 years. This is the lowest driver turnover, right, that I've seen. I didn't know that at the time. But the point is, it was not just management.
Yeah.
That whole now, by the way, having said that, there are people that come in and they're not the same. They don't fit, right?
Right.
And it's in part, a work ethic, right, component, but they don't fit and they exit pretty quickly, right? But it's very special, right? And it's a team, right? Approximately 6,000 employees, and it's a very special organization, right? I mean.
Yeah. So obviously one of the things that you touched on is building culture. And I think in a leadership role also, especially like you at as CEO of Pool, I think a really big aspect, I think, just when I look around too at the organizations I've been a part of and everything, is carrying out a vision and having a vision. So in part of me doing my homework for today too was I listened to a talk that you gave at the World Trade Center in New Orleans, an executive series, right? And I know one thing that just certainly stands out, and things that I think you've referenced before, even when you were on Kramer a few different times, was really the long view. You're projecting 7 to 10 years out. I mean, I know in that specific conference, which I think was recorded in 2013, you're referencing, building activity in 2020 and 2022.
Right.
And so I want to talk about vision for a minute and how important that is to really building a culture. And when you stepped into Pool and you're in this leadership role, do you recall really, having a vision, whether it was something that was, let's say, written down in concrete with like, certain sets of goals, or more so of just how you carry yourself and leading by example and really doing the little things, right? Which obviously lead to executing on the big.
So in my diligence prior to taking the pool role, because I was very happy where I was, all was good. Living in Miami Lakes, family good, and had a lot of latitude in what I did. So in my diligence, I outlined what I thought were opportunities for the company, and I had in my mind, I had those written down, the opportunities, and I had some perspective of how you sequence those opportunities. But, going back to your earlier question, trying to avoid being arrogant, I said, okay, you know what? I'm looking from an outside in, and I've talked to a few people, but I don't really. So in the first 6 months, and I when I look at any position, I usually look at my historically looked at my first 6 months as my, call it, investment period. Typically during that investment period, I typically am in the office by 7 or wherever I need to be. I start my day at 7 and finish about 11. Okay, and I do that, and that's like for 6 months, right? And there's the day part of that where I have kind of my core responsibilities, and then I also do all my investment time of trying to learn. So in that period of time, I visited 70 of our locations, roughly 70 of our locations. At the time, the business had 100 locations, so about 70%. I talked to like the top 40 or so suppliers. I met with several hundred employees, right, on whether it's 15 minutes or 2 hours, right, depending on the role, depending on whatever. Sometimes longer than 2 hours. But several hundred of our employees, and met with well over 100 customers. And what that gave me was that served as my ratification. So after that process was over, right, I came back to my list, right, and I said, it was like, call it, in terms of the opportunities, they were about 80% on. There's a couple that I had missed, right, and there were a couple that didn't really apply or not in the next 10 years. So then I prioritized and sequenced them, and then I came in and communicated to the senior team, right? Kind of like our vision, mission, strategies, right? And that then framed the thought process of where we invested capital and when we invested human resources as a business, it didn't happen. It wasn't a flip of the switch, but it became gradually transformative, right? As that was inculcated into everything the business did, so the thought process was, well, how does this tie into our mission? If it doesn't tie into our mission, it's probably not that important.
Right.
Put it aside. It's just 3 core strategies. How does this fit into the 3 core strategies? If it isn't, then it's probably not that important. So it came in through that. So it helped build that culture, and then that was reinforced. One of the investments we made was on people development, and there was elements of it that incorporated hiring individuals right out of school and putting them through a 6-month. Initially, it was a 7-month. They became a 6-month training program before they moved into a real position, and then where they learn more than they did in their undergraduate school, right? Especially about business, but about themselves as well. But it's that whole development program extended in every functional area, whether it's operations or sales or inventory management, a volume functional area. Didn't include like tax. Tax is just a few people, right?
Yep.
But every functional area where you have some scale, up through, I'll call it middle to upper management. So,
Okay.
And that program really helped reinforce the culture and the biases and everything else.
Okay. So I know we're getting close on time, so I want to touch on two more topics, hopefully relatively quickly, although I'm sure there's a lot to even unpack in these. But one is I want to talk a little bit about some of the biggest decisions you made and some of the things that you think back on and you remember maybe it being something that maybe you really wrestled with and something that you felt was, kind of a really difficult decision. I know obviously you were in your role, obviously through the great financial crisis and, I'm sure navigating some of that. So maybe want to touch on some of, or at least one of the biggest decisions that you really felt like you wrestled with and had to make and how you made that decision.
Business decision or personal career decision?
Business decision.
And you touched on the financial crisis. That was a window which was great, in my mind. We had a dynamic where we have a group of banks as part of supporting a revolver facility, and we have covenants as part of our debt. So I had that as a marker. I gave myself some cushion, right? And I thought, where can we double down on certain investments when people are playing it super conservative, right? To really come out of this in an even stronger position than we were coming into it, right? So for example, different things that we did. And this was not just my decision. Well, ultimately it's my decision, but it was my decision. But it involved others. So we have a management training program, right? We invest, we hire these individuals out of school, 6-month training program. So it's all cost, right? If you aggregated it, it's well north of $1 million, millions of dollars, right? Of cost. We decided to increase the hiring into that program.
What was the thought behind that?
The thought behind it was that there's a spectrum of population. That population is aging. We have these opportunities that will be out there 5-10 years out. And we needed to have people developed, trained, and ready to fill those needs that we were going to have in the future.
Talk about obviously a very long view and being very bullish on the future.
Right. I mean, because there's economic cycles, and another one was doubling down on digital investment,
right?
On tools for our customers to be able to function more effectively, and doubling down on those investing millions of dollars to enhance existing and develop new tools for our customers, right? Buying a business in an adjacent area, right? Still in the backyard, but in an adjacent area to help us be more important to our customers and their subs, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, these are investments, right? And I had a marker and said, okay, fine, I can't go wild here because our earnings are going to come down, right? Demand, new pool construction in the U.S. came down 80%.
And you still you still had those covenants in mind. So you're like,
yes,
I've got this CapEx that I want to go after, but I also need to maintain my covenants here.
Yes. OpEx, CapEx, acquisitions, we did all of that, right? and a doubling down investment with a cushion. I mean, it was the parameters and with a cushion. And then as the market began to turn, it was like we were way ahead,
Right.
right? And then that just increased our it further improved our positioning in the marketplace, right? In terms of our value prop to our customers and suppliers.
It sounds like, really, from an overall management perspective, if we just talk about really, fundamentally disciplined management, right? I think from a financial perspective, when you can easily look at companies that you can tell. I mean, if you just look at their balance sheet, they're maybe flirting with some ratios that may not, look very healthy. And it sounds like it's almost a lesson in, you know, um, saving for a rainy day, if that's what you want to call it. I mean, obviously, you talk about the greatest investor of all time. I mean, people point to Warren Buffett, right? And they talk about these cash piles that he'll have at these, different, pinnacle times where there's, tremendous amounts of opportunity in the market, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost as if, you're talking about really just following almost that same playbook where
Mm-hmm.
you didn't go too close to these lines. You gave yourself plenty of margin and opened yourself up to have these opportunities in really critical, times that obviously, resulted in, a tremendous amount of return for shareholders for Pool. Um, and I think that there can be a lot to be, said and learned just from that right there, right? Um,
Yeah, I mean, a key caveat there is, fortunately, had a very supportive board.
mhm.
By then, I had a fair amount of credibility, so therefore, I had a latitude. Um, and and the other part there is, I was managing for infinity.
Right.
I was not managing for a point in time, for an exit. I was managing for infinity, and I was thinking, how can this business become better? And that happens by being more important for your customers and more important for your suppliers, in the case of a distribution business, right? And executing that aspect of value in the most effective fashion. So again, I remember, over the course of years, analysts would call, after had an earnings call or whatever, right? They would ask about, well, what do you think about the next quarter? I said, I'm managing the business day to day, week to week, month to month, right? But I'm investing, right, for infinity, right? And the time horizon was typically 5 to 10 years out. People, this is what we need 5 years out, right, in the organization. This is people that are going to be retiring over this 5 to 10 year time horizon, right? And therefore, these are our needs. What is our pipeline of talent for those that are middle and upper management that are already in the organization, right? Or largely already in the organization. And these are the gaps that we have, and this is what we need to invest in. I mean, and by the way, this is not new thought. I mean, at IBM, this is where I learned some of this. At
Mm.
IBM, the resource planning, the human resource planning function was looking out 10 years, right? And longer. And I remember, because that's one of the reasons I was hired, right? It didn't work out because I left. But the point is, when I was hired, uh, the dynamic here was they saw that in their talent pipeline, they had a gap and they needed to fill that gap, and they were looking out 10 years out,
Right.
right? And they said, we need to hire whatever, I think it was like 12 individuals, with the logic that like five would be there,
Mhm.
right? At the time, to fill that void that they saw, right? And much the same way applies to.
That is, again, taking the long view. All right, Manny, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your time with us. This has been incredible. There's still so much that I haven't even got to, and I'm sure so much more that we can talk about, which means hopefully at some point in the future, I'll be able to convince you to come back on. So thank you for being with us.
Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And good luck with everything.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Roads and Riches podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting. Let us know how we're doing. And if you're an individual or a business that's in need of accounting services, maybe you're in the market for a new CPA, whether it be tax, accounting, fractional CFO services for your business, or transaction advisory services if you're contemplating a transaction, you should consider using Alpine Mar, the CPA firm that's redefining the accounting industry. You can head on over to alpinemar.com or roadsandriches.com to learn more about us and find a contact form to get in touch. Find out if we can be a good fit for you. We'll see you next time on the Roads and Riches pod.